Can you put into context for us some of what might have been behind the administration's move when it comes to competition in Venezuela, in Latin America, and deterring maybe China and Russia?
Certainly. So Latin America has, Chinese influence in particular, has really been growing in Latin America for the past decades. And China in particular had a very prominent role in Venezuela, although it turned out not to be such a great economic bet on the part of the Chinese. So I think great power competition is one of the variables that went into the decision to remove Maduro. I think, we've heard that oil is another reason. Of course, there is the fact that, as Secretary Wright said, that Venezuela was, on the verge of not already a failed state. But one thing to note is that Maduro is out of Venezuela, but Madurismo or Maduroism is still there because Delcy Rodriguez, who we've heard about, is, she was Maduro's vice president. And if we're thinking about the role of extra hemispheric actors in Venezuela, she was one of the architects of the Venezuelan relationship with China and with Russia.
Mm-hmm. Well, all of that said, then President Trump has made it pretty clear if she doesn't agree with what's going on, there could even be another military strike to remove her. So is Venezuela still a sovereign nation?
I think that's an excellent question. I think that many Venezuelans would say no, not at the moment, in particular because of who's in the fact that the United States has said that Delcy Rodriguez is now president and not members of the opposition that actually won the 2024 election, Edmundo Gonzalez and Maria Corina Machado. So, there is concern about what this will mean. This idea, will the U.S. be ruling Venezuela from afar, which would be something that's pretty unprecedented in recent history. Something else I wanted to mention, based on the great conversation you had with Secretary Wright, is the security situation in Venezuela. And this is kind of linked to the conversation about what is it going to take to get U.S. oil companies into Venezuela. And the security situation in Venezuela is dire. And you mentioned the militias, the colectivos, but they're also in areas where U.S. companies would be operating. There should be great concerns about Colombian guerrilla movements, in particular the presence of the ELN and dissident members of the FARC, the Colombian guerrilla organization that was partially dismantled after the Colombian peace accords. But they're also very powerful transnational criminal actors that have really taken advantage of the kind of these vast ungoverned spaces in Venezuela. So I think kind of getting a handle on the security situation to incentivize U.S. companies is going to be really important.
There are big questions about what happens next in Venezuela, but also what happens next when it comes to U.S. policy. And we've heard this administration with its messaging around Cuba, Colombia, though the president says that he had a good conversation with the leader there, but also Greenland. I'm wondering if you can put into context for us how our allies around the world are watching what this administration does next.
That's a great question, because I think right now, as in the Western Hemisphere, the countries of the Americas, it's a very polarized region. And so, for example, right now, if you look at the response of the countries of Latin America to what has happened recently, and this last week in particular, there have been really divided responses. So you've had countries that are more aligned with the Trump administration, countries such as Ecuador, El Salvador, Argentina, that have really celebrated the U.S. action in Venezuela. But you've also hear from major countries like Brazil and Mexico that don't have. Mexico in particular has really kind of condemned what happened, or what's happened, and particularly the fact that Delcy Rodriguez is still there. So there's a lot of division. I mean, our hemisphere is so divided right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the point here, I guess, of the conversation we've been having in Washington recently. Just the 30,000-foot view as someone who is, in fact, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Western Hemisphere Affairs. Are we now in a world in which hemispheric influence is the driving factor in geopolitics?
Yes, it's changed, right? We've seen a very rapid change in the U.S. approach in particular towards the region, with a much greater emphasis on kind of military might. There has been a history of that in the past, but not really in particular during the Cold War. So we've seen this real power projection, and we see it right now in the Caribbean. When I was Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, it was U.S. Southern Command was constantly battling for more naval assets in its area of responsibility. Whereas now we have over 15,000 troops off the coast of Venezuela. We have, this carrier strike group. So this is really quite unprecedented for the region. On one hand, it's great to see the hemisphere kind of getting the attention. I mean, for so long, it's been kind of overlooked, I would say, given that this is the proximity and the importance of the region to us. But this has definitely there's been a change in the approach. The U.S., of course, is working more bilaterally with countries of the region rather than through multilateral organizations. But I would say, in particularly, the prominence of the military, the role of the U.S. military in the region, is new.